Welcome to the Alpha Reading Channel. Here I share early drafts of my book so you can follow the story as it's being written. I post new parts as long as there's interest from you, the viewers. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe and leave a royal like. Chapter 15. Junior Master Zen had made it clear that the real challenge lay ahead. Getting the flag back down? That was the trial's true purpose. And judging by his words, doing so would be way harder than just climbing up. A clever test with multiple parts to it. Jin quickly hooked the flagpole behind his back, securing it with his pack straps. Now his hands were completely free, which would be crucial for the descent ahead. No point conserving energy anymore. He had to outrun all the other participants who would obviously be waiting for him to come down. After all, it was much easier to just steal the flag and walk down safely than risk climbing to the very top. Every second of delay could be fatal. Squinting, Jin surveyed the path he'd climbed up. The trail wound between scattered rocks and loose stone, dropping into a deep ravine on one side while hanging over a cliff on the other. The section was pretty steep, meaning you couldn't run fast without risking instant death. So he decided to choose a different route, one that led slightly to the side but would let him build maximum speed without risking his life. Mountains were familiar territory, and right now he could rely on his skill at moving through rough terrain. Jin shot forward, not wasting another second. His legs carried him along the now familiar path while his experienced eye picked the most convenient trails between boulders and jutting rock spires. Weaving between obstacles, he gradually built up speed, wind whistling in his ears. After a few hundred meters, Jin was already racing along a real switchback where every step had to be perfectly calculated. He couldn't afford to stumble even for a moment. One wrong move and he'd plummet down. And even if he didn't, other participants in this trial might take advantage of his mistake. Only after about a kilometer did two candidates appear ahead of him. Spotting the young man, they tried to block the road, spreading their arms and thrusting them forward like they wanted to catch him mid-flight. Still, their frightened faces betrayed their true emotions. They recognized him and were scared. Memories of how Jin had dealt with 4 cocky practitioners in the barracks must have surfaced in their minds. But they still decided to try stopping him, even if they acted pretty timidly. Sure, it was good that they weren't giving up, but their hesitant attempts just amused him. He accelerated, putting all his strength into a final burst. Almost reaching them, Jin swiftly yanked the flagpole from behind his back and swung it hard. 2 strikes, and the pole knocked both candidates back against the rocky wall. They cried out as they hit the stones and slumped to the ground, simply not expecting such a move from him. Jin didn't even stop to check their condition. He was mostly trying to scare them into stepping aside anyway, and it was doubtful he'd caused them any real harm. Even if he had, stopping would be the biggest mistake. He had no time for mercy. Reattaching the flag, he continued his journey. The sun had already passed its zenith, casting the mountain peak's shadow far ahead. The west was painted in pink and gold, promising sunset in a few hours. Jin picked up the pace, though he could hear the thunder of footsteps and human voices from different directions. The other candidates and disciples were very close, but he almost always managed to circle around them through barely beaten paths. Then, fighting through thorny bushes, he burst onto a small platform with an excellent view of the mountain trail's curves. The moment he caught his breath, silhouettes of a new group of pursuers appeared ahead. 5 outer disciples in silver robes with crescent moon emblems on their chests. Using the cloudless sky technique to examine them, Jin went cold. 7th level, 7th, 7th. Damn, even one at 8th level. How could he, a first-stage practitioner with 1 star, compete with an 8th level? That was serious business. One-on-one he might have tried it, but alone against 5 in open terrain, that was suicide. Carefully backing away, Jin dove back into the undergrowth, preparing to hide and wait for these guys to pass by. Better to let them go ahead, then slip past when the threat was gone. Besides, they didn't really need the flag. They served as another challenge for candidates in this trial. To his surprise, the disciples stopped right on that same platform he'd just left, apparently deciding to look around before continuing their pursuit. Their voices reached Jin. "If I'd gotten the flag myself, I would have earned my money back," one disciple complained. "Who could have thought some candidate would beat us all to it?" another angrily replied. "We only took this job because of that ridiculously heavy money pouch. Now we have to search for this brat all over the peak. We need to break all his bones for the inconvenience," a third grimly concluded. So that was it. Some candidate had hired these disciples and paid them a solid sum to get the flag for him without the hassle. And Jin had ruined everything by taking the prize first. Of course they weren't going to just back down when they saw a chance to get their money back. Anger made Jin's teeth grind. What dishonest scum? Hiring people to pass the trial for you? Wasn't that pure cowardice? And apparently some noble clan was behind them. Otherwise, where would a simple candidate get such money? At that moment something made Jin freeze. His heart started pounding wildly, his chest tightening with anxiety. Some kind of instinct seemed to trigger, because the disciple who'd just been threatening Broken Bones suddenly fell silent and raised his head. His nostrils fluttered like he was sniffing some trail. "There's something here," the disciple said warily. "That smell." Jin couldn't help sniffing himself. Had he really sweated that much? "Your nose is always perfect," one of his companions said alertly. "What do you sense?" They all tensed at once, craning their necks and peering into the thick undergrowth. The sharp-nosed disciple finally nodded, pointing his finger straight at Jin's direction. "Someone's hiding right behind that rock." "Damn it all. Shiza, check," the leader said, giving Jin's location a threatening look. "Everyone else get ready." Shiza nodded importantly and stepped forward, concentrating. He was clearly preparing to attack. No point waiting any longer. Jin spun around and tore down the slope with all his might. Behind him came a strangled roar of rage. The disciples realized he was trying to escape and gave chase. "It's him! He has the flag!" they shouted. "I'll break his legs, little bastard," the leader threatened. Never before had Jin's legs carried him so fast. He leaped from ledge to ledge, flew over rockfalls and crevices, managing to move along the steepest slopes. A couple times he almost stumbled but miraculously stayed on his feet, grabbing onto stones just in time. The pursuers apparently didn't dare run at the same speed, fearing they'd tumble off the cliffs. But that didn't stop them. Almost immediately they started attacking him from a distance using their chi, which clearly went beyond the rules, even if those weren't stated. The first two charges in the form of ghostly fists flew past, just whistling in his ears. But the third almost got Jin. A sharp energy palm grazed his arm, leaving a deep gash that immediately started bleeding. Jin cursed under his breath and tried to pull himself together. Again and again the disciples sent their destructive bursts at him, and he could only writhe like a snake to dodge their strikes. Constantly weaving, he didn't let them aim accurately, but who knew when they'd catch him? After all, it wasn't just one but 5 practitioners trying to get him, each one much higher level. Basically, his entire path now was a gauntlet of death. No matter how much Jin ran, the disciples stayed on his tail, not forgetting to pepper his head with choice curses. He needed to think of something. He clearly couldn't keep running and dodging chi palms for long. Then stone arches of a small cave appeared ahead, disappearing into darkness. Perfect place to turn the situation in his favor. There, in confined space, 1 against 5 would be much more manageable. Jin sprinted toward his goal at full speed, burst into the cave without sparing any strength, where thick twilight surrounded him from all sides. He stopped, gulping air hungrily and listening to his pursuers' footsteps. He looked around, trying to assess the cave situation. High vaults stretched upward a good 10 meters, disappearing into thick gloom. The narrow passage was no more than 5 paces wide, tight enough that the disciples couldn't surround him, but wide enough for 2 or 3 to attack at once, even if they got in each other's way. This way his chances of victory increased significantly. Resolutely squaring his shoulders, Jin concentrated and opened access to his spatial pocket. For a moment the air vibrated before him, forming a tiny hole in space through which he reached his hand. Almost immediately his fingers found the hilt of the serpent blade, an earth-rank artifact that had so conveniently come to him during the fight with that giant red viper. The sharp blade of the artifact weapon gleamed, as if the dagger was happy to reunite with its master. Jin felt amazing lightness spreading through his body from it. At that moment, dark silhouettes of pursuers appeared in the cave entrance. They noisily tumbled inside, looking around until their eyes adjusted to the darkness. "Come out nicely, you cowardly rat," the leader growled. "Surrender the flag, and then we'll only break your legs if you don't delay. We'll leave your hands intact so you can pick up scraps when you get out of the infirmary," a second disciple added with a smirk. "After such shame, they'll hardly accept you into the school." The others laughed loudly, feeling like masters of the situation. Their auras flared uncontrollably like flickering tongues of flame, making the cave's vaults tremble. Seemed like each of these outer disciples had his own powerful spiritual technique. Gotta give them credit, these guys clearly weren't useless. Against such power, Jin shouldn't even move unnecessarily. Still, there were chances. There always were. He shrugged, responding to their threats with a carefree smirk. "You're like dogs who rush to serve for scraps thrown to them. If someone paid you, would you break each other's legs too? You country worm," the leader roared, turning purple with anger. "Hand over the flag nicely, or what?" Jin threw down the challenge, pressing the flagpole to his back and raising the serpent blade before him. "You won't get the flag from me even if you cut off all my limbs. Unless you try taking it from my dead hands." The disciples' eyes blazed with fury. Auras shot upward like pillars of flame. Apparently none of the candidates would even think to resist them. And Jin's actions infuriated them, which was exactly what he needed. Chi vibrated around their bodies, forming intricate patterns of glowing lines. "So be it," the leader said, ready to rush at his opponent. Jin took a combat stance, concentrating and calling upon his chi as he'd done several times before. His instincts didn't deceive him, and he'd managed to grasp some basic points about using spiritual power. So at least his aura would be somewhat comparable to theirs. And at that moment all five froze at once, staring at him with horror and incomprehension. Simultaneously their auras dimmed, energy flows coiled into clusters, and they themselves began slowly backing toward the exit. "We didn't sign up for this," the leader squeezed out, swallowing hard. "We weren't paid for this. Too dangerous," the last disciple blurted. Jin watched in shock as all five quickly turned around and bolted for the exit. It seemed they'd been struck by terrible fear, seeing something in him that made their bodies and souls shudder with primal terror. In a moment their silhouettes vanished in the exit arch, leaving him alone with the echo of hurried footsteps floating in the air. From overwhelming emotions, Jin couldn't help laughing out loud, tossing the dagger from one hand to the other. He hadn't even expected his threat to produce such a strong effect. Seems his chi really did look scary from the outside. He smirked, brushing scattered hair strands from his face, thinking about how he'd frightened 5 outer disciples, and he hadn't even enrolled in this school yet but had already achieved such success. However, his amusement instantly faded when he caught the blood-red lines of the cloudless sky technique appearing in the corner of his eye. Jin exhaled, feeling the familiar chill run down his spine. Quest: look before you leap. Defeat the green spine crusher. Reward: penalty for refusal. Abnormal condition: paralysis for 4 hours. He spun around sharply, freezing with the dagger raised to strike. And literally the next moment, a creature from nightmares emerged from the cave's gloom before him. It was almost twice human height. A scale-covered giant body writhed like a snake, topped with a tiny fox-like muzzle. Flared nostrils expanded, trying to catch the slightest scent of prey, while tiny eyes gleamed brightly in the darkness. Bony ridges bristled along the creature's sides, behind which horrible clawed paws were visible. And as if that wasn't enough, 2 massive saber-like fangs protruded from its maw. A spine crusher. One of the mountain's most dangerous beasts, capable of pursuing prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. Jin himself had heard terrible legends about these monsters as a child. They loved attacking from ambush, tearing victims with claws and fangs to reach the most delicious morsel, the spine. Hence the name. The beast's roar echoed through the cave. Its maw snapped dangerously close to his face, enveloping him in putrid breath. Chapter 16. Without hesitation, Jin leaped aside, dodging the monster's attack. Its maw snapped dangerously close to his body, spraying slobber and foul breath. Chi instantly flared within him, making him lighter, more responsive. The spine crusher wheeled around, aiming its massive claws straight at him. He dropped to the floor, letting the attack pass overhead, then immediately rolled away to avoid the next strike. Couldn't stop moving. Stones sparked with each blow from the creature. Its strength was incredible. If the monster landed even one hit on Jin, only death would follow. Taking advantage of the beast's hesitation, he jumped to his feet and unleashed lightning-fast strikes with the serpent blade. The blade sliced through air, targeting vulnerable spots in the scaled armor. Eyes, mouth, armpits. The hide was always thinner in those places. Jin slashed the dagger across the creature's elongated snout, aiming straight for its eyes, but missed. Then, crouching low, he struck at the base of its paws where he could see gaps between the scales. The green spine crusher roared in pain. A shudder ran through its body as the serpent blade's poison entered its flesh for the first time and began taking effect. The creature's strikes became slower. Now each lunge grew more sluggish and predictable. Jin kept circling the monster, raining attacks on it. Of course, he couldn't hope to defeat it in open combat. He lacked the strength. His goal was to weaken the creature with poison. Only then would he have a chance to finish it off. At some point he got too caught up in attacking and the spine crusher's tail wrapped tightly around his leg. Before he could react, the monster jerked hard. The sudden pull sent Jin flying to crash into the nearest wall with a deafening thud. The impact knocked all the air from his lungs. Stars flashed before his eyes from the pain. But he immediately leaped to his feet, not allowing himself to hesitate. Otherwise the beast would tear him to shreds. Taking a spirit-boosting pill from his inventory, Jin swallowed it, feeling warmth instantly spread through his body. It really did invigorate him slightly and gave him better chances in this battle. The creature wasn't rushing to attack, instead dragging its paw and leaving furrows in the cave floor. An animal that had passed through some stages of cultivation understood when prey was beyond its capabilities. And right now the spine crusher's body was slowly being gripped by paralysis from the poison. Jin charged into attack again, putting all his strength into every strike. The dagger's blade flashed here and there, leaving bloody lines on the monster's scaled hide. Each new wound oozed greenish poison. This time he managed to dodge every counterattack. Time was working against the creature. Finally, Jin managed to reach its snout, and this time hit a vulnerable point. The beast howled in pain, blinded in both eyes. Now, having lost orientation in the cave's small space, it began thrashing against the walls, spraying blood and saliva. Jin leaped aside, avoiding another lunge from the creature. Its tail whistled dangerously close, striking the ground with such force that it left a deep crater. That could have been my head. The green spine crusher slowly turned toward him, hissing and growling. Involuntary spasms ran through its body. The poison's effect was growing stronger. This was his chance. He gripped the dagger's handle, gathering the last of his strength. The spine crusher opened its maw wide, but too late. Driven by all of Jin's force, the dagger blade plunged straight into its throat. He put all his strength into this final strike, piercing the massive skull. A putrid smell filled the air, but Jin kept pressing. The monster arched like a bow before letting out one last rasping cry and going limp. Jin struggled to pull the dagger from its corpse, stepping back a couple paces. His legs trembled with exhaustion. His chest heaved heavily. Sweat appeared on his face. If not for the poison's effect. With an ordinary blade he probably couldn't have killed this creature. Definitely not at his current stage of development. The familiar message from the cloudless sky technique appeared before his eyes again. Quest: look before you leap. Complete. Reward: Spine Crusher Spirit Core. Jin examined the creature, walked around it, but there was no spirit core to be found anywhere. Could it be? His brow furrowed. The damn technique wasn't helping at all. Turned out you killed the beast. There's your reward, but you had to extract it yourself. Well, at least the technique had mentioned the core's existence at all. Gripping the serpent blade more comfortably, he had no other weapon. Jin approached the spine crusher's belly. As far as he knew, all spiritual power should gather in the Dantian field, below the navel. Let's try. He cut away several hard scales to clear workspace, then plunged the dagger in, slicing open the belly. Gutting prey was nothing new to him. From deer and roe deer to hefty boars and elk. When you knew how to cut and where, things went quickly enough. And not too messily. With proper skill and experience, of course. A couple minutes later everything was ready. Rolling up his sleeves, Jin stuck his hands inside. God, the stench from this creature is absolutely disgusting. However, covered in blood, he did get his reward. This was it, the monster's spirit core. It fit perfectly in his palm, pulsing slightly as if it were a living being. The chi emanating from it radiated warmth and cold simultaneously, shimmering with all shades of earthy tones. Another new prompt appeared. Spine Crusher Spirit Core of the first stage. Common quality. Earth aspect. Jin frowned thoughtfully, gripping the treasure tighter in his hand. So spiritual beasts possessed elemental aspects. Fire, earth, metal, water, and wood. The 5 primordial elements that gave birth to everything existing. This monster had the earth element. Solid, fundamental, unyielding. Such a core would probably bring enormous benefit to any practitioner using techniques related to transforming chi into earth elemental energy. However, he had no information about his own aspect or what to do with the core now. He'd have to figure all that out later when he properly enrolled in the Moonwalk School. For now it was better not to show off his find, so Jin stowed the core in his spatial pocket. Turning around, he headed for the cave exit. The sun had declined considerably toward the horizon during this time. Twilight was beginning. His body still ached considerably. Pain flared up in patches here and there, pointing out the locations of bruises and scrapes he'd received during this fight. That creature had really roughed him up. He had to eat another pill. He still had plenty and they raised his body's natural recovery speed, if only slightly. Stamina also returned to him faster. Finally emerging onto the trail, Jin looked around. The path ahead was already clear, and all he had to do was follow it down to where the elders conducting the exam were located. The outer disciples apparently didn't believe he could get out of that trap alive, so they'd left. At least they were nowhere to be seen. And he barely encountered any candidates on the road. Just bypassed 2 small groups that were prowling around looking for his tracks. This way he managed to reach the last bend of the mountain trail, where the home stretch began. Just one final push. However, Jin had barely turned when he spotted several groups of candidates positioned across the trail's entire width. He even smirked mentally. Well, of course, the smartest ones had simply come here, down below. One way or another, he had to bring the flag here. Either that or he'd run into another group if there were other convenient descent trails here. Nothing simpler than waiting at the exam turn-in point to steal the trophy right in front of the elders sitting in the distance. And this wasn't forbidden by any rules. Take the victory and make a good impression. Show off in front of the 20th and 21st masters. By Jin's estimate, about 20 people had gathered there. Many faces were familiar. He recognized Qin Ro, who had apparently somehow managed to get out from under the rockfall and descend while he was busy fighting the spine crusher. Spotting Jin with the school's crimson banner fluttering behind his back, Qin Ro was first to rise to his full height. His face instantly became arrogant, and a smug smirk played on his lips. What an obnoxious brat. Here he is, our great victor, Qin announced loudly to the other candidates. Our valiant champion has single-handedly overcome all trials and now marches triumphantly with the school's flag. Bravo! Bravo! Quiet snickers and laughter rang out. Qin Ro was openly mocking Jin. I should have left him under those rocks. That's what you get for helping people. On the other hand, he'd had his choice at that moment, and Jin had acted as his own sense of justice dictated. So, Victor, Qin turned back to Jin, grinning insolently. You can't handle us all at once. First we'll take the flag from you, then fight among ourselves for the right to carry it to the elders. The other candidates nodded with snickers, approving Qin's words. They were all prepared for the fight, meaningfully cracking knuckles and tapping feet on stone. Nothing unites people like a common enemy, right? And what kind of stupid idea was this anyway? First everyone against him, then every man for himself. If they had even a drop of brains, they'd realize that in such a case the flag would go to Qin. With his iron body technique he was clearly second strongest, after Jin. Plus, someone like him had obviously gathered supporters around himself who would back him no matter what. Jin surveyed them all with a sharp, studying gaze. About 20 people. Even though only Qin probably possessed spiritual techniques, it was still too many for him. The crowd of candidates moved toward him from all sides, surrounding him in a tight ring. Lips twisted in malicious grins, eyes gleamed greedily at the sight of the Moonwalk School's crimson banner fluttering behind his back. Qin Ro stepped forward, raising his hands in a classic combat stance. Golden flashes of energy shimmered around his body. He was already gathering his chi, applying his technique. Just hand over the flag, and there'll be no problems, Qin demanded. Oh, you shouldn't have given me such a look. Quest, hit and run. Defeat those who stand in your path. Reward, penalty for refusal. Your self-preservation instincts will disappear for 24 hours. Neither fear nor sense of danger will be known to you. Will you manage to survive without such an important instinct? As if Jin was going to refuse this fight, but now he had even less choice. The technique simply wouldn't allow him to act otherwise. And what kind of idiotic penalty is that? Each time it mocked him more and more. Not happening, Jin spat out, taking a combat stance. He'd really like to use the serpent blade, but he feared the elders wouldn't appreciate such a move. It wouldn't be right. That same second, all the candidates furiously rushed at him. Real carnage erupted. Fists and feet flew from all directions, trying to knock the flag from Jin's hands, and when he struck back, the crowd only pressed tighter. Through the din of voices he could hear mocking shouts. Don't resist. Maybe you became top dog in the barracks, but we're not afraid of you anymore. Hand over the flag. Maybe you're strong, but there are more of us. Even a strong fighter gets overwhelmed by numbers. At some point someone's heavy fist crashed into Jin's jaw, making him stagger. Blood poured from his split lip, staining his teeth red. He began fighting back with triple fury, unleashing a hail of deadly strikes on his opponents. Blows with the flagpole, kicks, swings. Each of his attacks was monstrously strong and precise, like the legacy of long years hunting wild beasts. But the crowd had no intention of retreating. They were all united by a common goal: knock the flag from his hands at any cost, and with each second they seemed to grow more frenzied. Jin was forced back to the very edge of the trail. Opponents pressed in, trying to push him out and deprive him of his last foothold. His ears rang from the impacts, colored circles kept flashing before his eyes. The crowd buzzed like angry wasps. Snatch the flag, throw him into the abyss. Only this mattered to candidates drunk on the thirst for victory. They could taste that victory, and Jin was the only obstacle to it. In desperation he made one last attempt to fight off the crowd. Lunged forward, scattering opponents to the sides. But there were too many of them. They rolled in from all directions like a muddy torrent threatening to swallow him whole. Out of the corner of his eye, Jin noticed several familiar silhouettes approaching from behind, those same outer disciples who'd pursued him to the caves intending to steal the flag. They must have decided to take advantage of the moment and finish him off along with the rest. The situation couldn't be worse. He was trapped, surrounded on all sides, without the slightest chance of escape. Jin's gaze swept across the entire area, trying to find some way out. In the distance, near the finish line, he saw the school's elders along with the 20th and 21st masters. They sat calmly, watching this madness and simply drinking tea as if nothing was happening. And right nearby, at the very finish line, stood Mei, that same black-haired girl whose movement technique he'd involuntarily admired during the mountain ascent. Jin clenched his teeth so hard his jaw muscles bulged. Let them see this as kids playing in a sandbox if they wanted, but for him it was something more, something he absolutely had to overcome to be able to move forward. And screw the technique's quests, he was simply too stubborn to give up. Concentrating, Jin mentally opened his spiritual channels, allowing chi energy to pour freely inside. Its flow rushed through veins and meridians, threatening to tear them apart from within with this furious torrent. Scorching heat of spiritual power gripped his right hand, as if it had been heated white-hot. Maybe he'd never done this before, but all his instincts roared, telling him how to strengthen his arm. At that moment everyone rushed at him at once to finally crush him with numbers and take the flag. Jin looked up and smiled broadly. Then, after a short wind-up, he hurled the flagpole from his blazing palm like a giant spear. The distance to the finish was enormous. 200 meters at least. He'd never be able to throw it that far. But the chi filling his hand erased that barrier. May, Jin roared with all his might, looking at the finish line. Catch it! The crimson banner flew through the air. The fabric fluttered against the sunset, leaving a long trail behind. The chi flow was so powerful that it threw Jin's body backward, and his arm shot through with unbearable pain. Still, he didn't let a groan escape his lips. They wouldn't get that satisfaction. The moment everyone around realized what had happened, they stopped. Some rushed after the flag. How dare he? Candidates shouted indignantly. Freak! He just killed our chance of passing the exam. All eyes greedily followed the flight of the crimson banner aimed straight at May. She flinched, hearing Jin's desperate shout. Her beautiful sapphire eyes widened in surprise when she saw the approaching fabric. But the next instant, streams of wind flared up on her feet, forming intricate patterns, that same movement technique he'd seen before. May pushed off from the ground so sharply and swiftly that only a blurred shadow remained of her. Before Jin's eyes she covered several meters in one instant and caught the school's flag right in midair. Her feet softly touched the finish line, kicking up a small fountain of dust and pebbles. May froze, gripping the flag in her hand. Her face reflected surprise and disbelief. She seemed not to understand what had just happened. The deafening roar of Junior Master Zen rang out, announcing Mei Li's victory and drowning out everything around. Everything around froze as if turned to stone. The faces of those same outer disciples who tried to take the flag from Jin to earn money twisted into grimaces of hopelessness and despair. And Jin just unclenched the palm from which blood streamed from the monstrous strain of chi, and whispered barely audibly, "Maybe I didn't win, but I definitely won't let scum like you claim victory." Chapter 17. Everyone's gazes turned toward the finish line with annoyance. Mei Li, that black-haired beauty, still stood there, looking bewildered as she clutched the crimson banner in her hands. Her sapphire eyes blinked in amazement, as if she couldn't believe what had just happened, even when Junior Master Zen announced her victory. Just moments ago, this entire crowd of candidates had been Jin's bitter enemies, ready to take the flag from him. But now that May had crossed the finish line first, managing to react correctly to his desperate throw, all their interest in him simply evaporated. The candidates drifted toward the finish, talking in hushed voices. Many faces looked confused, as if they didn't fully understand what had just happened here. Only occasional flashes of anger flickered through the crowd when some particularly dim-witted type shot an angry glare at Jin, as if he should have simply surrendered instead of fighting to the very end. Yeah, right. Approaching the finish area, Jin saw the school's respected elders and two masters presiding over this trial. Gilran looked at him and nodded somewhat approvingly, almost paternally. The elders were writing something on narrow strips of silky paper, apparently evaluating what they'd seen and assigning some kind of rating. At least they looked very wise and important. Junior Master Zen paced before the formation, casting suspicious glances at everyone. Finally convinced that all were ready to listen, the man loudly announced, "Today is finished. Until the next stage of trials, everyone can return to their barracks and rest. Each will learn their results tomorrow, after the second trial, when the elders have fully assessed their abilities. Don't get lazy. Today was only a warm-up. Things will get much more serious from here." The young people grumbled and argued, wondering what could be more serious than running around mountains, but much more listlessly and tiredly than before. Everyone here had gotten thoroughly worn out during the day, too much to endure, and few had been prepared for mountain climbing anyway. People shuffled toward the courtyard entrance where the barracks were located. The less fortunate sat right there bandaging and licking their wounds, applying healing herbs if they hadn't had money for proper pills. Jin froze for a moment, feeling the tension of battle leave his body. However, the next instant he grimaced. At that moment, a chewing fin approached him. Apparently after the scuffle with the disciples, he'd abandoned attempts to climb further. That had been a sensible decision on his part. He wouldn't have gotten much further anyway, so you had to know when to stop. Finn couldn't contain himself, studying Jin with some childlike delight. "That was damn cool how everything turned out. I never would have thought you were capable of such a thing. And that final throw. Holy crap, cooler than any demonic technique? I've never actually seen those, but they say they're insanely powerful." Jin shook his head weakly. "I didn't do anything special." Finn elbowed him in the ribs and smiled gratefully. "Thanks once more for helping me out on the mountain. If not for you, those guys would definitely have shaken all the money out of me and beaten me up for good measure." After a pause, he suddenly chuckled, looking Jin up and down. "What's wrong with your face? You look like you ate a whole lemon. You're all scowling." Jin surfaced from his thoughts for a moment and looked at Finn. Then he shifted his gaze forward, where text from the cloudless sky technique flickered right before his eyes. Quest, hit and run, failed. Penalty, abnormal condition. Your self-preservation instincts will disappear for 24 hours. Neither fear nor sense of danger will be known to you. Will you manage to survive without such an important instinct? Jin involuntarily clenched his teeth so hard they squeaked. His suspicions were confirmed. The cursed technique was mocking him again. What the hell had he fought for here today if it ultimately deemed his actions a failed quest? He'd found a way to win, even if unconventional. Did this piece of shit expect him to act according to its established rules? Was he supposed to beat up everyone in his path? Well, maybe if you'd given him 10 extra levels, he would have done just that. Mockery. Jin cursed the technique, feeling his blood boil with rising anger. Whoever you are, you bastard who created this thing, I swear I'll get rid of your damned gift. Even if I have to go against fate itself. And suddenly something strange happened. Jin felt something new awaken inside him. Something completely unfamiliar. It grew and spread, filling his chest from within, expanding his ribs, penetrating every cell of his body. This was emptiness? Indifference? Jin couldn't find the right word, but if he tried to express it, he'd say, complete apathy had overwhelmed him. All feelings and emotions, all anxieties and doubts suddenly receded somewhere far away. Only echoes remained, but already colorless and blurred. The world around suddenly became sharper and clearer. It seemed to brighten, bringing out every tiny detail. Faces around froze, acquiring some petrified emptiness. Sounds became sharper, and smells hit his nostrils with new force. Jin looked around in shock, unable to grasp this turning point in all his senses and perception. Even his own body suddenly seemed alien to him. The burning pain in his palm where he'd recently concentrated all his chi power, the ache in his ribs where fists had landed, the ringing in his ears, all this transformed into detached discomfort. Nothing more than awareness of some physical condition. No longer remained any sense of danger or fear. Not the slightest hint of self-preservation that should have triggered after seeing the threat of punishment from the technique. Nothing. Only complete indifference. Even his anger at the demonic thing's unfair decision had evaporated somewhere. As if it had never existed, Jin stood like a statue, staring at one point. So this is the punishment. I'll go. Suddenly got hungry. Good luck with all this, Finn said sympathetically. The guy patted his shoulder and quickly walked away, not waiting for a reaction. Good luck with what? Jin whispered distantly, watching him go. No doubt remained that all his former feelings had evaporated in one moment under the technique's penalty. Ahead lay 24 hours of complete apathy and absolute indifference to everything happening. Now even the prospect of being eaten alive by a beast didn't concern him. Whether to take one last breath or continue this meaningless path. However, at that very moment a slender figure of a familiar girl approached him, and for the first time in a long while Jin changed his indifferent expression. So that's why Finn wished me luck. Mei Li, that same black-haired beauty, stopped before Jin. For some time she simply looked at him, bringing her thin, elegant eyebrows together. His indifference from the penalty seemed to puzzle her slightly. Apparently the girl had expected a different reaction from him, but it was good enough that he could partially overcome his condition and at least look at her, rather than simply walk past as he'd initially wanted. A strange condition overall, and understanding it would require much more time. Why did you give me the victory? She finally mumbled. You could have just handed the flag to them. Jin only shrugged, feeling not a gram of regret or doubt about it. In that situation there was no choice. Those idiots had surrounded and cut me off from all sides, leaving not a single chance for victory. And giving it to them meant definitely losing. Then you appeared ahead, and at that moment the decision came by itself. Maybe I didn't pass the trial, but I definitely wasn't going to lose to them. Even Jin's voice sounded terrifyingly monotone, but he couldn't color it with emotions. Mei frowned cutely again, and her face became puzzled. Why me specifically? Jin wanted to tell her about his demonic technique with its senseless quests and penalties. To tell her how he had to go against his own wishes just because some bastard who created this monster had decided to torment whoever accidentally found the scroll. However, instead he only shrugged. I thought of all the candidates, you were the most worthy of victory. Your movement technique was impressive. That was my opinion. And my decision. Nothing more. She flinched at his tone and blushed slightly. Thank you. I'm forever in your debt. Her voice suddenly became quieter, and her gaze drifted somewhere beyond Jin's back. First you saved me from Kador in the barracks, and now you've sacrificed your victory like this. I don't know how I can repay you for this, but I promise to do everything possible. My word. Jin tried to smile at Mei. At least he could show emotions with his face. even if he didn't feel them now. "You know, it's not so bad when such a girl owes you a favor," he said in a mundane tone, allowing himself to look into her eyes, which made the girl turn away embarrassed and head toward the barracks. Seems like someone's afraid of continuing a conversation that could go somewhere inappropriate, especially since May gave her word, and that's not something you can simply refuse. Jin followed. It was already completely dark outside. Only the last glimmers of sunset painted the mountain peaks red. In the distance he could hear muffled voices and groans coming from the finish line direction. The remaining candidates who'd been unlucky in the trial were still trickling in. Nobody had been sent after them. The school didn't need weaklings who couldn't even reach the rest area on their own. Any training at a martial arts school was a struggle for resources, and there really weren't enough to give to everyone. Plus there was no point. Then nobody would value their achievements and would quickly hit the wall of cultivation. Reaching the barracks, Jin went inside. Deathly silence reigned here, broken only occasionally by someone's sighs and muffled groans. Everyone around lay sprawled on their bunks, limbs scattered and hanging off beds, as if exhaustion had completely drained everyone's remaining strength. Some gloomily pressed healing salves and bandages to themselves, somehow bandaging scratches and bruises left after fights. Others simply lay absorbed in deepest sleep. Only a couple candidates felt good, but they either hadn't given their all during the trial or had healing pills for just such occasions. They really weren't in equal conditions, whatever anyone said. By the bed stood bowls with some herbal gruel. It tasted as nasty as it looked, but Jin could still distinguish the flavor of several healing ingredients, so it needed to be eaten to pass tomorrow's second trial. After the late dinner, he tossed his bag at his bunk's head and collapsed just like that, not even bothering to remove his shoes and outer clothes. His eyes closed on their own, and Jin only caught the edge of consciousness seeing flame from a couple candles flickering in the barracks. A moment later the bottomless abyss swallowed him. The next day began abruptly, as if yesterday's events had suddenly become something distant and unreal. Awareness of everything experienced came only later. Jin opened his eyes to a thunderous deafening roar, like those used for hunting predatory beasts in thick forests. Junior Master Zen was roaring right by Jin's bed. "Get up, you morons!" He poked his neighbor with his walking stick. "You lazy bastard, do you want to sleep in a ditch before breakfast?" Groans and rustling came from all sides, accompanied by furious cursing and laments. Seems today Junior Master Zen had decided to truly invigorate them in field fashion, loudly yelling and mercilessly kicking everyone lying in his path. Or maybe he was just taking revenge for some grievances. This was psychological conditioning. Who would endure such abuse or run away? However, Jin himself rose silently and without objection. His apathy toward what was happening made him absolutely indifferent to everything around. Only will forced him to keep moving. He wasn't going to surrender to the demonic technique, whatever it had in store for him. Such a degree of indifference from Jin only briefly puzzled the pink-cheeked fat man Finn, who approached him expecting they'd exchange a few words as usual. But instead he simply stepped aside, letting Jin pass, then shuffled along behind, muttering about something. A few moments later they were already lined up in the courtyard for morning washing, after which they were directed to a huge training hall. Elders sat along the walls. Among them were two from yesterday's guests who had presided over the initial stage of trials. 20th Master Gilran, 21st Master Sarmosha, it seemed. Junior Master Zen took several steps toward the group of old men in silver robes, then announced, "Greet respected Elder Ibahi II, for he will conduct your second trial today." One of the elders nodded slightly, accepting their silent greeting. The other elders also nodded. Their movements exuded the very essence of imperturbability and learning. Real role models for future students. These really seemed to be people who had achieved considerable perfection and gone far on their path. Clearing his throat slightly, Ibahi II began, "A practitioner on the cultivation path must be steadfast and fearless. Fear can lead to death and hinder further training and advancement as practitioners. Moreover, true ascension and real growth can only be achieved when you are a hair's breadth from death, when your life depends on it. Therefore today I will test your steadfastness and mental strength. For I possess a rare technique of influence and mental attacks on a person's self." Junior Master Zen finished for him. "Elder Ibahi can create pressure causing fear and feelings you wouldn't experience in ordinary life unless you encountered a high-stage cultivation monster. And most importantly, he is so excelled in this gift that he can affect practitioners whose cultivation sphere exceeds his own by one sphere." Ringing silence hung in the hall. The elder continued his speech in a quiet, even voice that allowed each of them to hear and understand the meaning of his every word. "You need to sit in meditation poses along the hall's walls," Ibahi II explained. "Meanwhile I will begin exerting pressure on you with my spiritual technique, causing uncontrollable fear that will grow stronger every second. During this time the school's alchemist will light an incense stick for you. Your task is to hold out in place for at least 1 minute, until this stick completely burns away. In that case the task will be considered completed. and you can be proud of demonstrating endurance worthy of a practitioner and future school student. However, you should also know that the pressure from my technique won't stop until the last of you leaves the circle. This is another test of your spiritual strength. In the past, the most capable candidate endured 5.5 minutes of my technique's pressure. Now he is one of the geniuses of the school's inner courtyard. The elder fell silent, looking at everyone with a barely noticeable smirk on his thin lips. He seemed to take definite pleasure from the very thought that he would now try to break their minds. But Jin, after hearing this, almost burst out laughing. Right there, at the top of his lungs, rolling and loud, not caring about Junior Master Zen and all the elders. Truly, there might be no more suitable moment for such a penalty from the cloudless sky technique. Getting absence of fear in a trial where you need to withstand it, this was truly incredible luck. Has fate itself turned in my favor? And it turns out this technique isn't as all-powerful as I thought, and it can make mistakes. Chapter 18. Jin-Ri settled into a cross-legged meditation pose on the soft mat, spine straight and hands resting on his knees. The other candidates arranged themselves similarly throughout the spacious training hall, spacing themselves out in a neat grid pattern. The hall fell silent except for the soft whisper of breathing and the occasional rustle of robes. A hunched alchemist scurried into the room with quick, shuffling steps. He bowed deeply to the elders before freezing like a statue in the center of the space. Elder Ibahi, too, gave a slight nod. The alchemist struck a flame and lit the incense stick, filling the air with thick, aromatic smoke. Jin-Ri closed his eyes and sank into peaceful emptiness. Even the sounds from outside seemed to fade away, leaving nothing but perfect silence. Then he felt it, the spiritual technique washing over him like sinking into warm water. This should have been terrifying. Fear should be creeping into his heart right now, his mind conjuring horrific images from the oppressive atmosphere. But there was nothing. If anything, the technique's touch felt pleasant. Jin-Ri let his thoughts drift, ignoring everything around him. The sensations were completely different from what he'd expected after all that build-up. Memories flickered through his mind. Childhood scenes with his father, that harsh face and piercing gaze as he taught Jin-Ri everything he knew. Mother had died in childbirth, leaving father to raise him alone. Jin-Ri had always been grateful for that, especially since father had done such a good job. During their travels, he'd seen plenty of other families, and most weren't as happy as they'd been. He remembered their last meeting before father disappeared. They'd stopped in a small village on the edge of a dark forest where, according to local rumors, demons lived. Hunters avoided the area, fearing for their lives. But father had never backed down from danger. He actually enjoyed a good hunt. Father had looked at him with those sharp, wolfish eyes and said he was going into the demon's lair alone. He needed to set protective wards to seal them off and make the territory safe for village hunters. These weren't ordinary beasts. They were intelligent creatures with chi cultivation rivaling any practitioner. Under no circumstances was Jin-Ri to follow him. Wait here, and he'd be back in a couple days. The thought of father facing those dangerous predators alone had terrified Jin-Ri. Cold sweat had broken out across his skin. He couldn't imagine managing without father's guidance. No, I'm coming with you. He'd protested desperately, but father had cut him off with that harsh stare. I told you to wait. You'll understand someday. Just give me a couple days. I'll be back. Hunter's honor. So Jin-Ri had waited, spending 3 days in that village. Father had promised 2 days, and Jin-Ri believed him. He'd never lied before, never been wrong. But the 4th day came with no sign of father. That's when real fear had gripped Jin-Ri for the first time. Throwing aside his father's orders, he defied him for the first time in his life and plunged into the impenetrable forest. For a whole week he'd wandered among the trees, sleeping under the stars wrapped in animal hides, setting signal traps around his makeshift camps. All he'd found were scraps of father's torn clothing and the broken remains of his favorite hunting bow. Jin-Ri had searched desperately, going deeper and deeper into the woods until he realized he might encounter the demons himself and never make it out. Something had broken inside him that day. Part of his innocent worldview crumbled to dust, leaving only darkness and burning pain. He'd refused to accept that father had died brutally at the claws of demonic monsters, but eventually, he had to. Jin-Ri had accepted it. Father wasn't coming back. Ever. Pain had given way to understanding. Complete acceptance. Right before the March snows that year, he'd sworn to continue father's work, traveling to settlements and helping hunt dangerous beasts for those who couldn't manage on their own. Through what felt like thick water, Jin-Ri heard creaking floorboards. Someone was breathing heavily, choking. Someone cried out. Someone was trying to run. How much time had passed? The technique was clearly taking effect, and many candidates couldn't handle it. Whatever. Jin-Ri would just sit here until someone told him to stop. He felt like he could sit like this forever. These memories of father must be the technique's influence. Back then, he'd felt terror, pain, bitterness, a flood of overwhelming emotions. He'd wanted to curl up in a corner or run away. If he felt that now, It might be difficult, but right now, there was absolutely nothing inside him. Jinri didn't bother watching the other candidates struggle. What was the difference between looking at a still puddle or a raging ocean? Same water, same ripples. The air around him began to change. The atmosphere thickened with clots of power. Sticky, tangible chi energy flowing in misty swirls from Elder Ibahi 2. You could feel each one in your bones. Demons of flesh and bone grinned with mouths stretched impossibly wide, grasping fingers reaching for souls. But crystal emptiness filled Jinri's head. For the first time, he was actually grateful for the demonic technique's side effects. With each breath, he expanded his chest, breathing calmly and steadily, drawing the chi-saturated air deeper into his lungs. Normally there was so little of it, just scattered crumbs of life force. But now, with the Elder's technique creating a true storm of energy in the hall, why not absorb at least a drop? Maybe this was the trial's hidden purpose? Absorb the scattered chi left behind by the Elder's technique and endure as long as possible? It was possible that absorbing this energy would cause even greater fear, but he didn't feel any. Well, maybe he couldn't sense spiritual pressure, but he certainly wasn't going to turn down free chi. Interlude. Elder Ibahi II of the Moonwalk School was one of 5 supreme elders whose influence shaped the entire sex development. Even masters who'd achieved considerable heights felt awe before this man and his flawless mental attack technique. Abyss of Fear, that was the name of the rare secret art that had become Ibahi II's key to ascension through long years of cultivation. Its origins reached back to ancient legends, and the elder took pride in mastering such powerful heritage. Using the Abyss of Fear on young students had become something of entertainment for Ibahi II. Of course, he never crossed the final line, since these boys and girls were still far from true cultivation. But that made the lesson more valuable for the few who showed unbreakable will against the most terrible nightmares. In the Moonwalk School's spacious training hall, the silhouettes of meditating candidates were barely visible in the half-darkness. Only a few oil lamps flickered along the far wall, casting strange, dancing shadows. Elder Ibahi II stood in the center and began gathering his Abyss of Fear energy. He spoke steadily about breathing techniques, feeling his mental attack growing stronger. Fear wasn't just terror and trembling knees, it was a worm gnawing at the soul from within, claws gripping mind and heart. He commanded them to tremble. Ibahi II thrust his hands forward sharply. Dense clouds of darkness poured from his palms, quickly flooding the space. The incense flared with bright flame, and viscous silence settled over the hall. Everything mixed in a hellish dance. Screams of horror and cries of pain erupted from the corners. Shadows thickened into bizarre monster shapes with gaping maws and protruding stingers. The air foamed like boiling liquid, waves of madness washing over the helpless candidates. When Ibahi II got serious, even practitioners of higher cultivation stages fled in terror. These children would need only a fraction of his power. The elder inhaled with pleasure the emanations of pure fear rising from the crowd of candidates. Some collapsed to the floor, gasping helplessly for air. Others tried to run, breaking through the thick demonic shadows with such fury that their palms bled from striking the floor and walls. Many rolled back their eyes and lost consciousness. Weaklings, the elder thought. The Abyss of Fear had barely begun to flare in his hands, and some couldn't even withstand these gentle breezes, much less the threshold of real fear. After 30 seconds, many began crawling out of the circle in terror, seeking salvation. When the technique released them, they collapsed on the floor, breathing heavily as they tried to recover. A minute passed, and the technique's waves intensified, knocking even more conscious candidates out of the circle. Only about 30 remained in meditation, while most had fled to sit along the walls as spectators. Among them was Finn, that same fat man who liked following Jinri around. He trembled all over like a drunk, muttering something about all the world's food disappearing and girls being thin as sticks. His particular brand of fear was certainly amusing. After that minute, many chose not to tempt fate and left on their own. The elder's gaze focused on the 5 strongest participants who had enough willpower to stay in place and resist the technique's influence. Among them was the promising scion of the wealthy Ro clan named Qin, whose bloodline showed considerable potential for advancement. Also in the circle was that dark-haired girl Mei Lai from a reclusive family. Little was known about her except that she possessed a rare movement technique even the elder wouldn't mind studying, though there was no rush. But this boy, the same one who helped Mei win the first trial, he seems prone to showing off. Ibahi II frowned, focusing his intense gaze on Jinri. The boy made a strange impression. His face was completely indifferent, devoid of any emotion. He simply sat absorbed in meditation, paying no attention to the waves of fear and pain. Looks like the youngster's gotten cocky, the elder smirked. Well then, I'll quickly knock that arrogance out of you. Chuckling, Ibahi II increased his power by almost half, allowing the bestial energies to flow with doubled force. Huge demonic faces danced around the candidates, licking them with flame tongues and plunging invisible stingers straight into their hearts. The floor beneath the elder buckled, unable to withstand the incredible pressure of his mental attack manifesting as physical force. Mei Lai doubled over, gasping for air and looking around wildly. A sturdy fellow in the same row suddenly screamed and nimbly rushed from the circle. Finally, unable to bear it, the girl also jumped up and fled, stopping only at the far wall where she could collect herself. Not a bad result, either. In the end, only 2 remained in meditation. Qin Ro was breathing hard, struggling against surges of nightmarish visions. Jin Ri remained completely unperturbed, as if the technique didn't affect him at all. The elder glanced at this upstart Jin and felt rage boiling in his veins. How dare you treat me this way? Aiba he too thought furiously, unleashing a full wave of fear. The chi became even thicker, flowing from form to form and taking terrifying shapes. I am Aiba he too, Supreme Elder of the Moonwalk School. I have ascended beyond the limits of the human soul, reaching the true sphere. You're just a pitiful rat that can be crushed underfoot at any moment. The full power of the abyss of fear rushed at Jin in streams of poisonous energy. The air filled with the smell of sulfur and rot. Reality itself seemed to tremble, unable to withstand the devastating assault. The entire floor cracked deeply, and the ceiling beams groaned. After 4.5 minutes, Qin Ro's nerves gave out. He snapped his eyes open, and they held primal, animal terror frozen within them. Bloody foam flowed from the corners of his mouth, and he suddenly wheezed as if invisible hands were strangling him. His body arched, and Qin collapsed unconscious to the floor. Only Jin Ri remained. Now Aiba could unleash his full power, building energy faster than usual. His technique didn't affect the unconscious. However, the 6th minute passed, breaking the record of any past genius the school elder had encountered. Jin still hadn't moved. He didn't move when the 7th minute passed. Then the 8th. Some candidates outside the immediate circle began fainting from the tension, but Jin Ri sat in the same pose. Whispers began circulating among the hardiest about what was wrong with this guy. How could he withstand such pressure? Someone suggested he was abnormal. Maybe he had some powerful clan ancestry and was just an unrecognized bastard? Or he had an artifact and was cheating. Finn raised his voice, telling them to stop talking nonsense. Jin was a simple hunter who'd earned everything himself. He glared at everyone who dared doubt his friend's strength. The 10th minute passed. Amazement showed on the elders' faces. This was unprecedented. No one had lasted so long in the school's entire history. Even when the trial had been conducted by Aibahi's father in the distant past, and he'd been quite harsh, not sparing students, though he'd used a different technique, the principles had been similar. What madness? Aibahi thought. The hall trembled under his technique's might, and the elders' faces contorted from the monstrous pressure. Even some of them found it difficult to maintain composure in such a situation. Master Gilran jumped from his seat, throwing a furious look at the elder. Are you out of your mind? Using full force against a junior? The boy has already won. What's the point? Aibahi hissed through his teeth that this wasn't his full strength. Red droplets had appeared from the old man's nostrils. Jin, unknowingly, had wounded his pride, and the elder wasn't going to let such a candidate off easily now. As he'd said, he would increase the technique's power each time. Gilran's protege might not withstand it. If he took on too much, his head would explode like a ripe watermelon. But if Gilran wished, the elder could stop the trial right now. This was an obvious bluff. Aibahi too had been using his technique at maximum capacity for 2 minutes now, trying to break the incomprehensible Jinri. His hands shook from strain, and his cheeks had sunken, giving his face the appearance of a death mask. He hoped Gilran would get scared and stop the trial. At least then Aibahi wouldn't humiliate himself before the other elders. Where had it ever been seen that a youngster could withstand the full might of his incredible technique? And despite all this, the young man still hadn't moved. Even his eyelids hadn't trembled under the elder's most destructive attack. Go ahead, Gilran. Stop this trial, and I'll tell everyone you didn't let me test the boy with my full strength. That he didn't walk this path to the end. Suddenly Master Sarmosa exclaimed. He had been watching the boy carefully all this time, and in recent moments with impermissible intensity. Has he just broken through to the second star of the first stage? One of the elders cried out in amazement. How could anyone break through during such a difficult trial? This is impossible. But it was true. Jinri had indeed achieved a breakthrough. A breakthrough no one had expected to see during such an exhausting trial. Chapter 19. Jinri remained in his meditation pose, completely unaffected by the waves of energy pouring from Elder Aibahi II's technique. The abyss of fear hammered down on him with everything it had. But thanks to the cloudless sky technique's side effects, he felt no distress whatsoever. Nightmarish visions played out before him. Phantoms with razor claws tearing at his flesh, but it was all just illusion. An empty shell containing nothing but indifference. Then Jinri noticed something new. A surge of chi energy was filling the hall like thick fog. The elder's spiritual power hung heavy in the air, forming strange patterns and swirls. Reality itself seemed to shiver under the weight of all that power. A distant memory surfaced from childhood. Father had taught him how to recover strength during those long hunting trips through forests and mountains. When your legs gave out from exhaustion and your hands could barely hold a weapon, he'd said to stop and open your soul to the world. Imagine a funnel in your chest, Father had told him. A bottomless, hungry funnel that devours the energy of everything living around you. Trees, animals, wind currents, everything saturated with the vital force of creation. Just open your heart, and that power will flow into you, filling every cell with energy. Back then, Jinri hadn't understood the advice. Nothing had worked except calming his thoughts. But now, he focused mentally, imagining a massive funnel opening in his chest, greedily pulling in streams of spiritual energy. Qi rushed into him at incredible speed, filling every pore of his body. At first it was just a thin stream, but gradually the flow grew stronger and stronger. Qi poured into him, filling his meridians and then his energy nodes to capacity. A whirlpool seemed to form inside him, capturing more and more spiritual energy. Jinri felt his body filling with power, muscles trembling from the strain of contained force. Spiritual energy boiled in his veins, threatening to tear him apart at any moment. Then something clicked inside him. Like the last lock opening, the Qi flow suddenly surged forward, overcoming every obstacle in its path. His meridians opened wide, expanding and gaining new capacity. Energy flooded his body, filling every cell to the brim. Translucent lines flashed before his inner vision from the cloudless sky technique. You have reached the 9th level and become a second-star practitioner of the first stage. Jinri couldn't help but smile, feeling an incredible rush of power. Amazing. From 6th straight to 9th level. So this technique counted advancement through cultivation stages as level progression? Energy kept pouring into him, filling him beyond all limits. He felt like he could absorb just as much again. But then the flow dried up. Elder Ibahi too had apparently reached his limit and could no longer maintain the technique. Jinri opened his eyes, struggling to focus. An incredible sight greeted him. The Moonwalk School elders stared at him with bewilderment and amazement written across their faces. Many wiped sweat from their temples. Even Gilran watched him with a mixture of delight and confusion. But what struck Jinri most was Elder Ibahi II's expression. The old man looked like he'd swallowed a basket of sour berries, his face twisted with rage, contorting into an ugly grimace. Apparently, the fact that Jinri had weathered all his efforts and even advanced to a new level during the trial had dealt a serious blow to the narcissistic elder's pride. Soon enough though, he pulled himself together and tried to paint a condescending smirk on his face. Obviously didn't want to advertise his defeat in front of the other elders. Ibahi II finally broke the silence. He gestured for quiet and announced they'd had enough. They had all witnessed a truly remarkable event. The candidate had defied expectations by passing his Abyss of Fear trial and even managed to break through to a new cultivation level. Though of course, he quickly added, shooting Gilran a warning look, my technique's power was only a pale shadow of its full strength. I feared that if I'd continued building it up, I would have caused irreparable harm to such young talent's health. Naturally, none of us wanted that. Junior Master Zen stepped in to save the awkward situation. Let's announce the final results of the entrance trials. He called out loudly, collecting scrolls from the elders. Based on the combined scores from both stages, we've compiled a ranking. Each new candidate will be assigned housing and receive the right to choose their initial spiritual technique for school training. However, the top 3 places get personal houses. Only the best can count on such privileges. The junior master waved his sleeve, and a long silk scroll unfurled in the air like a banner fluttering in the wind. Everyone's faces froze in anticipation. First place, with a huge lead over the rest, goes to Jinri, he announced, wincing slightly as if the words were extremely unpleasant. He gets personal quarters and first choice of initial training technique. The hall erupted in mixed reactions. Many candidates broke into applause and joyful exclamations, celebrating Jinri as the winner. Someone even whistled with delight, expressing amazement at the result. Only Kinro and his supporters grumbled indignantly, shooting Jinri malicious looks. Second place goes to Kin of the Ro clan. The junior master continued over the crowd. Third place, Mei of the Lai family. These two get to choose spiritual techniques next. After Jinri, the crowd buzzed with renewed energy. Some congratulated Jinri, others hugged and sobbed with joy, celebrating their admission. Many names weren't on the list, deemed unworthy of even outer disciple status, but everyone listed was still considered an outer disciple for now. Thin positively beamed, smiling from ear to ear as he raised his fist and roared with delight. Junior Master Zen kept speaking loudly, unrolling the scroll further. He announced the names of the remaining 28 candidates who had distinguished themselves during the trials. They had passed selection and become outer disciples of the Moonwalk School. These people would be divided into houses of 4 and also receive the right to choose a spiritual technique for training. Remember your numbers on this list, they're important. This is exactly the order you'll be ranked in the school's general student roster for this year. The elder began announcing candidates' names one by one. Finally, the 31st and final name to pass selection came from the very end, Finn of the Raimondo family. When Finn's surname was announced, many began whispering and casting strange looks his way. Jinri made a mental note to ask him about it later in a quieter setting. Finn himself wasn't the least bit upset by the news. He spread into a satisfied smile, thrilled just to make the school roster at all. Remaining ignorant in a world of cultivators was the most terrible shame imaginable. Junior Master Zen cut himself off, carelessly dropping the scroll to the floor. That's all. The rest are free to go. You can try your luck somewhere else. Maybe in a couple years you'll grow stronger in spirit and can try again. Jinri exhaled with relief as he looked at the technique text that appeared. Main quest. A frog that decided to learn to fly. Complete. Reward. Moonwalk school student status, personal quarters, respect from other students. The Cloudless Sky Technique's reward was, as always, full of readable sarcasm. But that didn't dim his triumph. Besides, they'd lifted the penalty from him. Since he got first choice of technique, he could take the rarest one, the kind provided for outer disciples in a single copy. Such techniques definitely existed. Otherwise, this whole business about who chose scrolls first would be pointless. Soon they were lined up and led to the school's residential sector. Junior Masters kept glancing admiringly at Jinri, whispering and nodding in his direction. Apparently his success in the entrance trials had completely surprised them. Gilran and another master simply left the training hall without even speaking to him, but that was expected. They finally reached a small courtyard with 3 separate houses in traditional style at its center. These 3 houses now belong to the best candidates of this year, the junior master announced, pointing at them. The remaining students will live in shared quarters, divided into groups of 4. Follow me. They followed him into one of the nearby buildings. Junior Master Zen threw open the door, letting them into a spacious hall for general assemblies and group meditations. Older outer disciples were already crowding inside. Tomorrow, with the first rays of sun, daily lessons in mastering basic spiritual techniques will begin, the man proclaimed, calling for silence. In the Knowledge Pagoda, you'll choose your direction of improvement from those available to outer disciples. You'll have a month to study the basics, after which elders will check each student's progress. A buzz of excited whispers rolled through the hall. Many newcomers shifted impatiently from foot to foot, anticipating their first real lessons worthy of cultivators, which they already saw themselves as. The junior master continued, frowning. Besides this, all students are required to fulfill various errands and tasks assigned by school elders. Each task will award you rating points and rewards in the form of spirit stones. These can be spent acquiring pills, technique scrolls, or spiritual treasures within the school. I advise not neglecting this opportunity. Details will be explained tomorrow in your first lesson. For now, disperse to your living quarters and rest properly before tomorrow. And don't forget to visit the Knowledge Pagoda. They dispersed, receiving directions from Junior Master Zen. Jinri found his cottage and pushed through the low door, stepping inside. The room was sparse but somehow cozy. Nothing unnecessary. A wide bed for sleeping and meditation, a low table, a couple candles in copper holders. In the corner sat a whole stack of blankets and pillows, and by the entrance were piled bundles of kindling for the hearth. It reminded him of the hunting lodges he and father had stayed in at various villages. Lodges that were never truly theirs, only temporary shelter. He wondered how long Jinri could stay this time. Not wanting to waste precious time on rest, he decided to take advantage of the opportunity and immediately visit the Knowledge Pagoda to choose his first spiritual technique for study. Leaving his new dwelling, Jinri walked unhurriedly along the elegantly stone-laid path leading to the building he needed. Chapter 20. The Knowledge Pagoda rose before Jinri like a giant lantern carved from white stone. Multiple tiers stretched skyward, crowned with ornate cornices. 2 squat wings spread out on either side, probably libraries and scribal workshops. Massive bronze gates blocked his path, their surfaces decorated with intricate engravings. Each door bore a pair of giant dragons wrapped around the metal with clawed feet, glaring menacingly at anyone who approached. Jinri reached out and pushed the gates open. A deep bronze chime rang out, echoing through the spacious courtyard beyond. The gates creaked apart, admitting him to the pagoda's inner grounds. The view that greeted him was magnificent. The courtyard was paved with smooth stone slabs, between which narrow streams of crystal-clear water babbled. Fountains spouted from the channels, and bright orange fish swam lazily through the waterways. At the center rose a huge basin reflecting the clear midday sky. Not a cloud visible, not a ripple disturbing the mirror-perfect surface. Up close, the pagoda itself was breathtaking. Its walls appeared hewn from solid snow-white marble, and the window shutters gleamed like mirrors in the sunlight. The enormous building radiated quiet majesty. This was exactly how a repository of knowledge should look. The moment Jin-Ri stepped onto the courtyard stones, a slender girl in crimson robes approached swiftly from the left. Her wide sleeves concealed her hands, and a thin silk veil covered the lower half of her face. But even that couldn't hide her stunning beauty. Her large eyes resembled bottomless lakes reflecting mysterious stars. For a moment, strange markings seemed to flash around her pupils like separate symbols right in her eyes. Jin-Ri blinked, thinking he must be overtired and imagining things, since he saw nothing similar afterward. She moved toward him with graceful steps. "I am Inala Rendir, knowledge keeper of this pagoda." The girl introduced herself. "I've heard of your success in the entrance trials. It seems you brought Elder Ibahi to back down to earth." Her melodious voice made Jin-Ri startle. He'd expected to meet some head elder here, someone creaky and arrogant, not the gentle chiming of a refined beauty. Coming to his senses, Jin-Ri bowed courteously. "Thank you for the honor. May I choose the technique I need to study right now?" The girl folded her hands at her chest, tilting her head back slightly. "Of course. The first floor of our pagoda is open to you, where beginning spiritual techniques for the 5 elements are stored. Look at the scrolls carefully, study the descriptions, and settle on what appeals to you. Do you already know which element your body is drawn to?" Jin-Ri thought for a moment. What technique should he choose? Qi was the energy of life itself, flowing through every living being's veins, but few could learn to control it. He had much to learn, and this world offered great diversity and paths to understanding this mystical energy. "I haven't decided yet," he finally answered, "but I'm curious. Could you tell me which scrolls here are the rarest? I'd like to focus on something truly valuable. Since I'm choosing first, I want to consider those that exist in single copies." The girl nodded, and the symbols in her eyes flashed with interest. "A wise decision. Here on the first floor, most scrolls exist in dozens of copies, so accessing that knowledge wouldn't be difficult. But some are truly unique. 5 treasures await, of which the knowledge pagoda has only 1 copy each." She counted on her fingers. Volcanic dragon, fire techniques, dance of 9 lotuses, water arts, life redirection, wood styles, path of the jade god, earth philosophy, steel fist, metal element mastery. These techniques belong to the 5 immortals, whom our sect's first patriarch appointed as rulers before his departure. Of course, only the first volumes are available. All these names sounded incredibly tempting. The fiery might of the dragon, the fluid grace of lotuses, the piercing power of steel. Each art radiated power in its very name, but Jin-Ri wanted to see the other scrolls too. "Be careful," the keeper warned. "Not everyone can master a technique of the 5 immortals." Jin-Ri nodded respectfully. "Thank you for the guidance. With your permission, I'll walk around the floor to see everything myself." Though he couldn't see her face, her eyes suggested she was smiling. "Of course. Knowledge is a precious gift. You're free to study every hall of the first tier. No one will disturb you until you make your choice." She bowed courteously and stepped aside. Jin-Ri walked under the pagoda's arches, finding himself in a long corridor with numerous doors on both sides. Above each hung an inscription indicating the treasures stored within. First was the Hall of Fire Arts. Pushing through the door, he entered a huge room filled with the crimson glow of torches and bronze lamps. Trembling heat filled the air, as if fire itself had condensed inside. Endless shelves stretched along the walls, holding hundreds of scrolls of varying sizes and shapes. Parchment tubes, tight rolls, thin booklets in bright bindings, golden script shimmered on each. Jin-Ri reverently unwrapped one scroll, opening to the first page written in fiery font. It described the fire strike, first stage. Give form to Qi, embrace the heart with flame of the inner world. Become one with the dance of hot currents and bring them down on the enemy like a volcanic eruption. Every line radiated passion, might, and furious energy. Despite these being beginning techniques, coming from the mortal world, he could fully feel their power. Too bad he could only browse them here. Studying them fully would require purchasing them from the room. Next to each scroll sat a small plaque showing the buyout price, and the costs were substantial. But no one forbade looking. Next came the Hall of Water Sciences. Coolness and half-darkness reigned here. Wide windows overlooking the artificial streams in the courtyard only slightly relieved the dim atmosphere. Jin-Ri's gaze swept over scrolls depicting whirlpools, tsunamis, and dancing water spirits. Water was also an element of extremes, sometimes gentle, sometimes merciless. Everything depended on how you planned to apply the knowledge. One by one, he visited the halls of earth, metal, and wood, familiarizing himself with each element's teachings. Life flourished everywhere. Power was evident, but in its extreme forms, complete chaos, absence of balance. Even this alone was educational and gave him much to think about. Finally, Jin-Ri found himself at the entrance to the most remote and shadowy part of the pagoda. Here under the arches, Almost no torches burned. Only a couple lamps illuminated a gigantic door of black wood. Above it, terrifying words were inscribed, Hall of the Five Immortals. He examined the massive doors with careful attention. This was exactly where those 5 rarest manuscripts Inela had mentioned were stored. His heart beat faster as his fingers touched the smooth wood. Could it be that behind these doors waited the technique that would become his true path? Not this cloudless sky, but something truly. Suddenly, familiar translucent letters began gathering across his field of vision, forming into technique text. No! Why right now? Don't you dare tell me which technique to choose. Quest: study the technique that will conquer the heavens. Interlude. The sun was declining toward the horizon, painting the skies above the Moonwalk School in crimson. The elders were gathering in the assembly hall to discuss the day's events and plan their next moves after successfully accepting a new batch of students, another group they deemed worthy of stepping onto the cultivation path. How they would walk it remained to be seen. In the spacious hall crowned with carved ceiling beams, heavy clouds of incense-saturated smoke hung in the air. The elders seated themselves one by one on cushions arranged in a circle. Some propped bony hands on staffs, others twirled jade prayer beads through their fingers. But many among them didn't look their age, maintaining powerful bodies for decades. Everything depended on the path these people walked. Finally, Ibahi too entered the hall, one of the school's 5 supreme elders. He proceeded to his place with the air of a displeased emperor, looking down on everyone. Let's begin the council, Ibahi too said curtly, settling among the other supreme elders. We have many matters to discuss. The other old men nodded in agreement, but some were already glancing his way with sly smirks. Apparently they'd prepared a few surprises for the council head. Elder Fania, head of the administrator's pagoda, those who assigned tasks to students according to their abilities, began speaking. We'll move straight to the most important point. Yesterday we witnessed how a youngster who wasn't even a student yet, just a candidate, passed the Abyss of Fear trial. Silence hung in the hall like a thundercloud. Ibahi-2's gaze flashed with rage, but he restrained himself and only nodded, gesturing casually for his colleague to continue. So what of it? Another elder picked up the thread. Yes, an amazing event. His famous technique failed against some village boy without family or clan. Isn't this a blow to his reputation as a supreme master? A barely audible whisper spread through the hall. The other elders chuckled, dropping mocking remarks about how much effort their highly esteemed Ibahi-2 had applied. He'd prepared like that every time and waited for the trial, and in the end, this candidate Jinri hadn't even broken a sweat. More boldly the elders began discussing the moment. Ibahi-2 couldn't stand it and slammed his palm on the floor. A wave of chi poured in all directions, extinguishing torches and whipping smoke whirlwinds to the ceiling. All the elders fell silent, pressing back into their cushions. Don't go too far, the elder's voice thundered, making the ceiling beams tremble. You dare not speak thus of the Abyss of Fear technique. I applied only a small part of it. Were it otherwise, we'd have no new students this year. Ibahi-2 swept everyone with a fierce gaze, studying each elder as if ready to shake the soul from them. The boy endured only because he possesses natural spiritual fortitude, nothing more. Don't diminish my art. I could have broken him like a twig in a hurricane instantly. But should I lose face and lash out because of a youngster? Should I have killed our school's promising talent? Talent that might glorify our school in the future? Ibahi-2 drew a noisy breath, suppressing his agitation, then continued in a calmer, almost insinuating tone. However, this is just one worthless youngster. He'll either perish in half a year among second-rate outer disciples, or leave these walls in shame like all the base-born rats before him. For us masters, wise with life experience, to pay him so much attention is the height of blindness. The other elders lowered their gazes, not daring to contradict the supreme elder further. Heavy silence reigned, interrupted only by the crackling of torches another elder had quietly relit while observing everyone. However, Fania, who was also a supreme elder, didn't want to give in. With a friendly air, he said, the event itself, of course, isn't as important as you say, but it could have far-reaching consequences. There's talk, whispers behind backs, that you're no longer suitable for the role of supreme elder. If some village youngster could surpass you, what would your position be among real masters? There are fears that soon a wave of dissatisfaction will rise against you, and someone more worthy will take your place. Ibahi-2 froze, listening to every word from his longtime acquaintance. His face contorted with fury. A minute passed, and the supreme elder pulled himself together. If you're finished, let's move on to more important matters. The rest of the evening passed more calmly, but the elder's soul was tormented by the fact that he'd become more vulnerable. Leaving the hall, he called over his assistant, a young man about 20 in appearance. The man bowed deeply. I want you to summon my personal disciple, Ibahi-2 announced. Where is he? On a mission? The assistant mumbled, lowering his gaze. I fear that's impossible. A couple days ago, your personal disciple Ramas Rain went to the Ascension caves for 2 months of secluded improvement. He did this on your instructions. The assistant bowed low, hoping not to anger the elder. A vein swelled on Ibahitu's forehead, but he restrained himself. Are you aware of those 10 young men who brought me gifts, hoping to become my personal disciples? The elder asked. Pass along a message from me. Whoever first cripples that arrogant rat Jinri gets what he desires. I'll take him as my second personal disciple after Ramas. I want him maimed, but left alive. Let him remember his place forever. The assistant asked carefully, fearing to make a mistake. Teacher, are you speaking of the new student Jinri who beat the trial record? The elder smacked his assistant on the back of the head. Fool! Of course him. Challenges are forbidden until a student completes his first task, so let them prepare for now. As soon as Jinri finishes his first assignment, they must act. The assistant nodded eagerly and hurried away toward the outer disciples' quarters. Ibahitu hissed under his breath. So he wanted to humiliate me before the entire school's eyes. At that moment, he didn't care that the candidate couldn't even think such a thing. The elder's own conviction was enough. Then let him rejoice that I've decided to leave him alive. Though perhaps with broken legs and arms, he really would have been better off dead. But that's no longer my concern. And Ibahi burst into mad laughter that carried over the school like an ominous echo. Chapter 21. Quest: Study the technique that will conquer the heavens, but only after cloudless sky mastery. Study the basics of the Moonwalk School's best technique, Moonlight. Reward: penalty for refusal. The technique will seal your meridians forever, condemning you to a pitiful mortal's life. Besides the technique clearly starting to mock him and developing arrogant traits, it was also threatening to destroy everything Jinri had achieved. But wasn't it the very thing that had been dragging him along the cultivation path? This would hurt the technique itself most of all. The stupid thing. Rage flashed through Jinri like wildfire in dry grass. Damn it all, he hissed through his teeth, barely restraining the urge to smash the entire hall to pieces. He had no choice, did he? The technique was forcing him to study something he knew nothing about. Cursed cloudless sky technique. Whoever the bastard was who'd created it clearly got sadistic pleasure from tormenting him, whether he was in the heavens or the underworld. Jinri exhaled, trying to calm down, but this whole situation infuriated him beyond measure. He clenched his fists until his nails bit into his palms. Once he ascended high enough, he'd find him, whoever he was, and pay him back for every penalty. Just a couple hours ago, it had seemed that right here in the Knowledge Pagoda, he would find the path to true power, find a rare technique that would become his real treasure, or at least the exact step that would let him climb even higher. Instead, the damn thing had pulled another vile trick, robbing him of the right to choose. Then, in the thick of his furious emotions, Jinri noticed something glowing weakly in the hall's depths, a flickering point of light that seemed to break through from the shadows under one of the shelves. Without hesitation, he approached the spot. With a sharp tug, he pulled out the heavy shelf, moving it aside, then reached into the gap between shelf and wall. His fingers found something hard and rolled up, like a scroll yellowed with age. When Jinri pulled it from the dust and mold, weak radiance broke through the clinging debris. He squinted and shook his head, trying to clear his vision, but the glowing bundle remained in his hands. Jinri peered closer. This was a scroll. Ancient, forgotten, falling apart, torn in places. But it still glowed, illuminated by the radiance of the cloudless sky technique. Are you mocking me? Jinri hissed, staring in horror at the empty pages. Not a single letter, not a line. Only tattered, time-eaten paper ready to crumble at the slightest touch. At that moment, translucent letters appeared over the meaningless manuscript. Moonlight Technique, first volume, incomplete. Quality: legendary/useless. Jinri froze in bewilderment. Simultaneously legendary and useless? This was completely meaningless. There wasn't a word here. It wasn't incomplete. It was empty. But then the veil of rage lifted, and understanding came. This wouldn't end until he accepted the rules of the Cloudless Sky Technique's insane game. Time to resign himself and get the scroll, since there was no other way out. Sighing heavily, Jinri shook years of dust from it. He stood and returned to the pagoda's exit, where Knowledge Keeper Inela Rendir was still waiting. At the sight of the old scroll in his hands, her long eyelashes fluttered and her eyes widened like twin pools. Her pupils trembled along with the veil covering her face. "Where did you get this?" she exclaimed, approaching so quickly that Jinri nearly stepped back. From under one of the shelves, he answered honestly, letting her take the ancient manuscript. "Something about it attracted me. This technique is empty, but it seems like with it, I could achieve true understanding of cultivation and the path ahead." Inela touched the edge of the faded paper with trembling fingers. Stars of recognition flickered in her eyes, and on her visible cheekbones, An excited flush slowly bloomed. "Are you sure you want to study exactly this technique?" she finally asked, barely containing her excitement. "This is the moonlight technique of our school's patriarch himself. It's been forgotten for centuries. Lost. Until this moment. Honestly, even I didn't know the first volume was hidden somewhere here." "It's an empty scroll," Jinri pointed out. "Oh, no. It doesn't reveal its secrets to just anyone," Inela objected. She closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering her thoughts, then looked at Jinri again, as if still not believing he'd discovered such a treasure. "When our patriarch founded the Moonwalk School, he decided to divide all his knowledge among his 5 best students. They became known as the 5 Immortals. The patriarch gave each one of the 5 volumes of the Moonlight's sacred writings, so they could comprehend the essence of his teaching and continue the path." She paused briefly, then continued, her voice full of power. "Only there was complete nonsense on the scrolls. None of them managed to master it and solve its mysteries. All the 5 Immortals techniques now stored behind the black doors are merely derivatives of what they were able to learn themselves." She paused again, looking Jinri straight in the eyes. "Legends differ. Some say there was a 6th volume that completed the training, and due to its absence, the patriarch's students couldn't comprehend the moonlight technique. However, as the Fire Immortal said, this isn't a technique at all, but merely a hint for creating your own path. Thus were born the named techniques of the 5 Immortals." The keeper ran her gaze over the paper scraps again, as if seeing them for the first time. "No one has ever studied this technique. Perhaps even I don't really know what it is. But are you? Are you sure?" she asked again, as if trying to dissuade him. Jinri would have gladly chosen something else, but there was one huge but hanging like a curse over his head. "I have to try," he said resolutely. If he wanted to get rid of this demonic technique, he'd have to play by its rules. For now, he simply had no other path. Inela studied him with a long, penetrating gaze. She seemed to be trying to decipher the true reasons for his desire, but in the end only nodded. "I won't take any payment from you for studying this manuscript. It would be unfair to charge for something we'd already forgotten. Take it. But note, if after a month you have no success, you'll return the scroll to the pagoda." Jinri bowed gratefully, accepting the ancient writings from the keeper's hands. The old paper scraps felt surprisingly heavy. Pressing the manuscript to his chest, he turned and walked away from the knowledge pagoda. Well, maybe not everything was so bad. The cloudless sky technique might have been created by quite the bastard, but one way or another, it delivered results. He figured this time there would be results too. The only question was, what kind? Jinri reached his house and spent the rest of the day there, not wanting to see anyone. He needed to get his thoughts in order and properly consider his next steps. Twilight had thickened over the Moonwalk School, shrouding paths and buildings in gray mist. Soon night fell. From Jinri's window, the moon was already peeking out as a diamond half-disk, preparing to shine at full strength in a week. So, Inela had said the technique didn't open to everyone. However, neither direct chi influence nor attempts to see something at different angles helped. Maybe he should have asked about spiritual vision techniques, but he didn't want to approach Junior Master Zen out of the blue. Half-darkness filled the room when Jinri sat on the bed, whose springs produced a creaky trill. Pulling off his boots, he spread the ancient sheets before him. Now they were illuminated by the flame of a single thick wax candle. It flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Jinri pressed his gaze to the time-worn paper. Then like lightning, a memory of that old notebook his father had carried pierced through. Among various notes and sketches, it contained an ancient method for revealing secret inks. If his records were correct, somewhere in one of the mountain villages whose existence very few knew about, there existed an ancient technique for applying invisible inks. Their recipe was known to few and passed down through generations. These inks were invisible until the writing was exposed to candle heat. Back then this had seemed like fiction to Jinri, but now. He lifted the scroll and carefully brought it over the candle so it would warm up but not accidentally catch fire. He was afraid the scroll's old material wouldn't withstand such a test. However, no ink appeared. Jinri stood like this for about 10 minutes until he finally sat back on the bed and tossed the scroll aside. Nothing was working. He sat for several minutes until his gaze fell on the scroll that had rolled right into a moonbeam flashing momentarily in the room. That moment was enough to see something new on the scroll, and he nearly slapped his forehead when he understood something obvious. Idiot? What candle? The moonlight technique. Obviously it would manifest under moonlight. He should have guessed immediately. Jinri stepped over the low windowsill and carefully climbed onto the roof, trying not to make noise. Everyone in the school was already asleep, and he didn't want to attract unnecessary attention. The cool night breeze made him shiver. Settling into meditation pose, he unrolled the first volume of the moonlight technique, turning the written pages toward the night sky. Half the moon shone in all its glory, illuminating each battered page with dim silvery radiance. As Jinri had expected, words slowly began appearing on the long faded sheets. The paper warmed slightly, as if under invisible heat, and swirls of lunar script gained clarity, forming into mysterious messages. Moonlight Technique. Volume 1. Embrace of the Lunar Maiden. Child of the Moon, you have decided to follow the bright path, unclear in darkness. Good luck to you, for this path is known to few. The first step, cast aside worldly concerns and find serenity, clear as a lake's mirror surface. Only when the mind is like a smooth surface can the moon reflect in its waters. Jinri pondered these lines. It seemed first he was required to achieve complete mental silence and concentration. Only then could he advance further along the lunar path. When the mind's surface is unperturbed, direct your inner gaze to the play of lunar radiance. Contemplate the dance of silvery rays, catching each reflection and imprinting them in your heart. For moonlight is the seed from which will grow the meridian leading to the lunar sea. These words plunged Jinri into confusion. Exactly how should he contemplate moonlight? Focus his gaze on it or try to sense its energy from within? Perhaps concentrate on the very movement of light rays across the sky? So many meanings hid behind these words that his mind simply couldn't grasp them all at once. Jinri exhaled and in complete silence tried to dissolve into the endless play of light and shadow created by the night sky. But everything was futile. His mind refused to calm down. With a sigh, he opened his eyes again. The moon still illuminated the roof with steady radiance, bathing the entire courtyard in milky white shimmer. And suddenly everything clicked. As if Jinri had always known how to do this, but had simply forgotten. Now he remembered. He peered at the branches of an old oak casting strange shadows. Illuminated by moonlight, they intertwined on the ground, forming an intricate pattern. The shadows lived their own smoothly changing life, now lengthening, now shrinking back again. But all their movements were determined by the dance of moonlight itself. That was it. To absorb lunar energy, he needed not simply to contemplate the light itself, but become one with this perfect harmony of radiance and shadows. Feel how light rays washed over his flesh while shadows fell in rhythm with their beat. Nodding resolutely, Jinri plunged into meditation again, this time allowing streams of lunar radiance to flow freely over his body. Tree branches cast smoothly changing patterns, and soon it seemed he himself had become one of these strange shadows. He moved weightlessly and fluidly in unified dance with light and darkness, neither lagging behind nor ahead of their eternal rhythm. His breathing evened out, and his mind gained amazing clarity. At that moment, something deep inside his body seemed to flicker, timidly responding to moonlight's calls. A thin glowing stream, like a thread of molten silver, stretched from nowhere to his chest. This was Qi, special, pure energy emanating from the moon itself, completely unlike what he'd experienced before. Sensing it, Jinri involuntarily fell out of the meditative state. At that moment everything stopped. The moon's subtle presence disappeared, along with that thread of silvery energy. Incredible. And terribly difficult. But the saddest thing was that the volume really was incomplete, because the next paragraph broke off mid-sentence. So if he tried hard, he could open the so-called lunar meridian, which for him meant, fill his body with this new type of Qi, but grasping the special silvery energy and absorbing it. He'd have to figure that out himself, without any hints. All that remained was to wait for the full moon, when this technique would manifest at its strongest. Here I share early drafts of my book so you can follow the story as it's being written. I post new parts as long as there's interest from you, the viewers. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe and leave a royal like.